My son's wife told me I wasn't real family, so her secret that she has been hiding for years come out at dinner. The roast beef was perfectly cooked, the table set with Margaret silver, and the noise level was the happy, chaotic buzz of a large family gathering. I watched my granddaughter, Lily, chase a piece of carrot around her plate, feeling that familiar, warm ache of contentment that only family can bring. Brianna, my son David's wife, sat across from me, her perfect blonde hair gleaming under the chandelier. We were discussing plans for the summer cottage, a property that had been in my family for 3 generations. I was explaining a small repair needed on the dock when, suddenly, Brianna put down her fork with a sharp, unnecessary clatter. Her smile vanished, replaced by a cold, hard line. The shift was so sudden and aggressive that I actually flinched. She didn't raise her voice, but her words were like ice water poured over the warm room. "You know, I am really tired of listening to this," she said, looking directly at me, her eyes daring me to challenge her. "You're not even real family, Eleanor. Stop acting like you belong here, telling us what to do with our things." The room went instantly silent. The cheerful sound of knives and forks stopped. Every single person at that long, mahogany table was looking at me, then at Brianna. My heart felt like a block of lead dropped into my stomach. I opened my mouth to speak, but only a dry, humiliating gasp came out. I looked desperately at David, my son, my only child, who was sitting right next to her. He didn't meet my eyes. He just kept staring down, utterly focused on the pattern of his plate. The silence was the worst kind of sound. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the sharp, painful silence that follows a gunshot. I searched the faces around the table, hoping for some outrage, some support, but everyone seemed paralyzed. My sister-in-law nervously adjusted her napkin. My nephew cleared his throat a little too loudly. I was waiting, needing my son to defend me, to say, "That's enough, Brianna, she is my mother." But David didn't move. He didn't say a word. He just kept staring at his plate, and the longer he did, the deeper the cut went. I felt the heat rising in my face, a mixture of shame and unbelievable fury. Then I saw it. Brianna, sitting straight up in her chair, met my gaze, and a slow, cruel smirk pulled at the corner of her mouth. It wasn't a moment of panic or accidental cruelty. It was a deliberate move. She had wanted this confrontation. She wanted to say those exact words in front of everyone, making sure I was humiliated and my son was trapped. It suddenly occurred to me that this wasn't just a dinner argument. This was a hostile takeover. I looked away from her awful smile, catching the eye of my niece, Chloe, who was sitting near the window. I saw her hand drop quickly from view, and she kept her head down. I didn't realize it then, but she had her phone out, and she was recording the whole painful scene. Brianna knew how to control a room, even after a catastrophic moment. After letting the silence linger just long enough to ensure my complete humiliation, she stood up abruptly. She was the picture of a gracious hostess, all warm smiles and perfect posture, completely unlike the viper who had just spoken. "Oh, goodness! I am so sorry for the tension, everyone," she announced loudly, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She addressed the room, apologizing for the scene, but never once did she look at me or apologize to me. "You know Eleanor," she continued, with a chuckle that encouraged others to join in. "She just gets so emotional about things. Sometimes we have to handle her with kid gloves." A few hesitant laughs trickled around the table, quickly spreading into a nervous wave of relief that the tension was broken, even at my expense. It felt like a public execution followed by an immediate party. The family was relieved to move past the awkwardness, and they did it by accepting Brianna's narrative. I was the emotional one. I was the problem. I watched as people picked up their forks again, the noise returning, but it was hollow now. I heard someone at the far end of the table whisper to their partner, "Well, she finally said it, didn't she?" The words confirmed my deepest fear. This wasn't a secret. This was a long-held, ugly consensus that Brianna had finally vocalized. I felt utterly alone, wondering how long this family, my own blood, had been laughing at me behind my back. The rest of the evening was a blur of forced cheerfulness, and I left as soon as I politely could, the echo of that cruel phrase burning in my ears. As I drove home, my mind, unable to process the immediate, huge betrayal, began to replay a frantic, painful montage of every small cut Brianna had inflicted over the past few years. It started small. There was the time she deliberately cropped me out of the professional baby photos of my first grandchild, claiming the lighting was wrong, but always including her own mother. I remembered her leaning close to my sister, her hand cupped to her mouth, whispering something that made my sister's eyes widen in alarm, and then they both stopped talking the moment I approached. The constant rearranging of seats at holiday dinners suddenly made cruel sense. I was always tucked away at a small, folding card table in the corner, never at the main family hub. She would rearrange, place cards right in front of me, smiling sweetly as she shoved my name to the farthest edge. The worst was last Christmas, when she'd insisted on a new family tradition, a secret family chat where only active members could plan the events. I hadn't been included, and I had pretended not to mind. Now I knew why. I pulled into my driveway, the house dark and lonely. I was just taking off my coat when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Chloe, my niece, the one who had been recording. The message was short and chilling. "Aunt Eleanor, there's something you should see. Don't tell anyone I sent this." My hands shook so badly that I had to hold the phone with both to tap open Chloe's message. She had forwarded a long string of screenshots, a terrifying glimpse into a secret family group chat that I had, thankfully, been excluded from. I scrolled through the pages, feeling every word land like a punch to the chest. Brianna's username, B_handles it, dominated the conversation. She was referring to me, not by name, but by a series of casual, vicious labels: deadweight, the relic, and the one that hurt the most, clingy. She was detailing how she had managed my recent visit, complaining about my presence, and laughing about how I always forced myself into family spaces, mirroring the exact language she had used at the dinner table. My own blood relatives, my sister-in-law, a cousin or two, were responding with laughing emojis and agreeing with her. The betrayal was deeper than I could have imagined. It wasn't just Brianna, it was a conspiracy. Then I saw a message from her that froze my blood. It was a clear instruction, sent about a week before the dinner. It was short and completely cryptic. "Make sure she's not invited next Sunday. We need the space clear for the discussion." What discussion? What was happening next Sunday that was so important I had to be actively excluded from? The next morning, I called David and asked him to meet me alone for coffee. I needed to see his face when I showed him the screenshots. He arrived 20 minutes late, already looking stressed and defensive. I didn't waste any time. I slid the phone across the table, open to Brianna's most venomous comments. He barely glanced at them. "Look, Mom," he started, running a hand through his hair. "I know you're upset. And Brianna's mouth? Well, she can be a bit dramatic, right?" I shook my head, unable to believe his casual dismissal of the words that had torn my dignity to shreds. "She called me deadweight. David, you just stood there and let her humiliate me in front of everyone." He leaned back in his chair, shrugging weakly. "She didn't mean it literally, Mom. She just meant that she feels she has to carry all the load now. She's trying to organize everything, and she thinks you're fighting her on the details of the cottage repairs." The excuses were weak and hollow, and I felt a bitter distance opening between us. "So, she's handling the family now?" I asked, holding back tears. He shifted uncomfortably. "Well, yes, she is. She's very good at events and making decisions." Then, his face went pale. He stopped talking abruptly, realizing what he had just admitted. He had accidentally confirmed that Brianna had been systematically taking over and handling family events, logistics, and decisions for months, effectively pushing me out of my own life. A few days later, trying to pretend life was normal, I stopped by David and Brianna's house, unannounced, with a casserole I knew David loved. The front door was ajar, and I heard loud voices coming from the kitchen. I hesitated in the entryway, realizing Brianna was hosting a group of her friends. I was about to call out a greeting when I heard my name in Brianna's voice, sharp and triumphant. "She's completely irrelevant now," she was boasting. "Honestly, she barely has a pulse on anything going on with the estate. I'll be running this family soon, thank goodness. She's just old news, and David is finally realizing it." Her friends giggled in agreement, and one of them chimed in. "It's about time someone took control." She was so clingy about the money. I stood frozen, the heavy casserole dish suddenly feeling like a crushing weight in my hands. The casual, almost giddy certainty in her voice was terrifying. She didn't just want to be a part of the family, she wanted to own it, and she saw me as the only thing in her way. I heard one of the friends lower her voice, the tone conspiratorial. "You're a genius, B. Now, tell me, did you hide the papers yet? You know, the important ones." I didn't wait to hear Brianna's reply. I quietly set the casserole on the hall table, walked backward out the door, and drove away, my hands gripping the wheel, so tight my knuckles were white. Hiding papers? What important family documents was she messing with? The word papers echoed in my mind for the entire drive home. I hadn't been home for 5 minutes when my anxiety forced me to check on something that had been in my filing cabinet for years. It was a thick, brown envelope labeled medical and legal directives, containing my living will, the power of attorney documents, and my medical directives. I kept it in a locked safe in my study. I hurried to the safe, spun the dial, April 21st, '08, Margaret's birthday, and pulled the door open. Everything seemed to be in its place, stacked neatly, but something was wrong. The brown envelope, usually crisp and sealed, was slightly crumpled at the edges, and the top flap was open, as if someone had hastily peeled it back and sealed it again with their finger. My heart leaped into my throat. I pulled out the contents, scanning the documents for any changes, but they appeared to be the originals, unaltered. What had Brianna been looking for? And how did she get my combination? As I was slipping the envelope back into the safe, I found a small, bright yellow sticky note stuck to the inside wall of the safe door. The sight of it made me gasp aloud. It was written in a familiar, sweeping script, Brianna's handwriting, and it contained a single, chilling message, handled. B. The audacity was breathtaking. She hadn't just accessed my private medical documents, she had left a physical taunt, a confident sign that she had been there and done whatever she intended. The feeling of being violated was overwhelming, but the pain wasn't over yet. The next morning, I made the mistake of looking at social media. Brianna, always the public performer, had posted an update that was clearly aimed at me. It was a seemingly innocent picture of her, David, and Lily, captioned with a very deliberate, pointed message. So grateful for this little family bubble of real love. Some people just force themselves into family spaces where they don't belong, bringing drama instead of peace. The comment section was already filling up, and every notification felt like a fresh application of salt to a wound. It was a public performance of a kitchen conversation, and the agreement from distant, less informed relatives was swift and brutal. "Oh, you poor thing, B. Dealing with family drama is the worst," wrote a second cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. "So glad you're setting boundaries," another added. The narrative was cemented. Brianna was the victim, and I was the invasive, drama-causing relative she was bravely fending off. Then, a message popped up from an older, distant aunt on my side of the family, someone who had always been kind. "Dear Eleanor," the message read, "I am so sorry to hear about the trouble. Brianna called me last week and told me you had caused a huge scene and caused drama at David's birthday, forcing them to call off the party." I stared at the message. David's birthday had been a quiet dinner at their house 3 months ago, and nothing had been called off. She wasn't just lying. She was actively calling my distant relatives, rewriting history, and cementing my status as the family pariah. I sat alone in my study that night, surrounded by the old leather books and photos that made up my life. The physical ache of the day had subsided, replaced by a terrifying clarity. The hurt was deep, but it was no longer consuming. I looked at the little yellow sticky note, handled B, that I had peeled off my safe and placed on my desk. It was a trophy of her victory, but I would turn it into a beacon for my own. Brianna didn't want me gone because I was emotional or deadweight. She wanted me out because I was an obstacle to something she wanted very badly. She had systematically isolated me, humiliated me, and tried to gain access to my medical and legal documents. It wasn't about love or belonging. It was about power, control, and most likely money. The time for being the sad, hurt mother was over. My quiet resolve hardened like steel. I looked at the sticky note and whispered to the empty room, my voice steady despite the years of pain. If she wants me out of the family, if she's willing to stoop this low, let's find out exactly what she is willing to do and why. I stood up and walked to my large, fireproof document box, pulling out the accordion folder labeled Family Estate. I began checking the contents against a handwritten inventory I had made years ago. The original copy of my late husband's letter of intent regarding the summer cottage was missing. A knot of cold dread formed in my stomach. Something was definitely missing. Please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The missing letter was a major concern, but what happened next was a complete shock. I rarely checked the old savings account tied to my husband's side of the family. It was a small, quiet account meant for future family inheritance, a little emergency fund for the great-grandchildren. It sat mostly untouched, accruing interest. 2 days after my discovery of the missing letter, my bank's mobile alert system, which I had recently set up, flashed a notification. A small withdrawal had occurred. Only $50, but it was flagged because the withdrawal was unusual. My hands were shaking when I called the bank to confirm. The young man on the phone, after some security questions, gave me the location of the withdrawal. "Ma'am, it looks like a debit card withdrawal made at a small, independent ATM on the corner of Elm Street and Sycamore," he explained. I knew that corner. It was right down the street from David and Brianna's house. Then he added, "The access window was about 4 a.m. this morning, and the IP address for the withdrawal trace shows it originating from a device that uses a Wi-Fi network near the address. I hung up the phone, the receiver buzzing in my ear. The access was not just near their house. The time, 4 a.m., meant it was someone inside their home, or at least someone using a device connected to their Wi-Fi. Someone was systematically siphoning money out of the family's future, $50 at a time, hoping I wouldn't notice the small amounts. I felt completely isolated, the pain of David's silence at the dinner table still raw. But fate, or perhaps karma, intervened. I was picking up some books at the library when I bumped into Michael, David's best friend since college. He looked terrible, stressed, pale, and constantly glancing over his shoulder. He immediately pulled me aside, lowering his voice until it was almost a whisper. "Eleanor, I can't let this go on," he said, his eyes wide with genuine distress. "I know what Brianna is doing. I know about the apartment, the cottage, everything. She's trying to control everything, and she views you as the only thing in her way." I listened, stunned, as he confirmed my fears. He told me that Brianna had been bragging to him about streamlining the family affairs and even admitted to him that I was in the way of her new vision for the family's assets. It seemed my son's best friend had a better sense of honor than my son did. He apologized profusely for not speaking up sooner, saying he felt trapped because of David, but he couldn't stomach the lies anymore. "She keeps a folder," he whispered, leaning in closer, "in her home office, in a locked drawer. She calls it her control folder. Find it, Eleanor. It has everything. She's been bragging about what she's been able to do with the estate, while David is clueless." Michael's words gave me the direction I needed, but getting inside Brianna's home office was a major hurdle. I knew she kept the room locked when she wasn't using it, but the next day, using the excuse of dropping off an old box of Lily's baby clothes, I got my chance. Brianna let me in, condescendingly telling me to just leave it in the hall, before she took a phone call in the kitchen. I slipped away quickly, moving silently down the hallway to her home office. The door was, as expected, locked. I pressed my ear to the wood, hearing nothing. I scanned the area immediately around the door, searching for any obvious hiding spot for a key. Brianna was meticulous, but she was also arrogant. She wouldn't think I would be looking. On a small antique table nearby, there was a large, decorative pillar candle. I moved it, and there it was, a small, tarnished silver key, resting neatly in the little ring of wax runoff. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands were surprisingly steady. I quickly inserted the key into the lock and turned it, the soft click sounding deafening in the silence of the hall. I eased the door open, stepped inside, and closed it gently behind me. The office was pristine, organized, and utterly soulless. It took me only a few seconds to spot the dark wood filing cabinet, and on the top drawer, a small, handwritten label, Estate Plan. I pulled the key from the candle holder and carefully unlocked the drawer. The contents were exactly as Michael had described, yet far worse than I could have imagined. I could barely breathe as I flipped through the heavy stock paper. There were photocopies of my personal documents, including my outdated will and my power of attorney, all flagged with little pink sticky notes. The most shocking discovery was a document titled Future Living Arrangement Proposal. It was a detailed, typed draft email, supposedly from David, suggesting I sell my home and move to a lovely, supportive community 3 states away to be closer to family resources that didn't actually exist. But the most damning evidence was a contract tucked near the back, bearing David's signature. It was an agreement to refinance the summer cottage, not for repairs, but for a substantial cash-out equity loan. The purpose of the loan was simply listed as asset reorganization. David's signature was there, clear as day, but the date was recent, and he had told me he had only signed insurance papers 2 months ago. My blood ran cold as I realized the extent of their plan: control my medical decisions, exile me far away, and steal the equity from my most cherished family asset. This wasn't just about disrespect, it was about outright theft. I left the office exactly as I had found it, the key back under the candle, the drawer locked. I didn't steal the documents. I simply photographed every single page with my phone, the evidence now safely stored and dated. I needed to confront my son about the refinancing contract, but I had to do it carefully. I met him for lunch the next day, keeping the conversation light until the end. I then pulled out the photo of the contract, placing my phone on the table. His reaction was immediate and terrifying. His face went white, his fork clattering onto the plate. "What is that? Where did you get that?" he stammered, his eyes darting around the restaurant. "You signed a loan to take equity out of the cottage, David," I said quietly. "You told me you signed insurance papers." His panic broke him. "She told me it was for insurance. She said the bank needed a spousal signature to cover liability in case of a fire, since she handled the policy now, he confessed, dropping his voice to a strained whisper. She said it was complicated paperwork, and I didn't need to read it all. His eyes filled with tears, not of remorse for me, but of sheer terror at being caught in his wife's deceit. He looked completely shattered. Then, the most important truth came out. He admitted that Brianna hadn't just been handling the events. She had been funneling all important family and financial decisions away from him, intercepting mail, and isolating him from the details. The conversation with David, while painful, confirmed that Brianna had been operating a secret life for months, using my son as an unwitting shield. My next step was to find out who else she had been trying to influence. I remember the lunch conversation Michael had mentioned, Brianna bragging to a former friend. I managed to track down the friend, a quiet woman named Carol, who had recently stopped associating with Brianna. I met Carol at a quiet cafe downtown, and she was visibly relieved to speak. Brianna has an appetite for control, Eleanor, Carol explained, stirring her tea nervously. She saw you as the matriarch, and she wanted that title and everything that came with it, the property, the respect, the control. Carol confessed that she had witnessed Brianna bragging about getting rid of obstacles, and how Eleanor wouldn't know what hit her because she was so old-fashioned. The conversation painted a picture of a calculated predator, but Carol then hesitated, her eyes flickering. There was one other thing. Brianna was obsessed with your health. She kept hinting at something about a hospital incident, but I didn't understand what she meant. The memory of the sticky note, handled B, from my safe and the opened medical documents, came flooding back. Brianna wasn't just after the money, she wanted control over my very existence. The hospital rumor was the next thread I pulled, and it led to a terrifying discovery of character assassination. I visited my regular pharmacy, a small, independent place where the owner, Mr. Hemmings, and his head tech, Maria, knew me well. I was picking up a prescription when Maria, a woman I had always liked, pulled me gently aside. She looked concerned. "Mrs. Eleanor, I hope you're doing better," she said softly. "There was a strange story circulating in the area about you. It reached a few people here. They were saying you were in the hospital recently and verbally abused the staff, causing a huge scene. That's why you were having to change your primary care doctor." I was speechless. I hadn't been in the hospital, not even for a routine checkup, in over a year. I certainly hadn't abused anyone. "Maria, that's completely untrue," I said, feeling a chill run down my spine. "I've been perfectly healthy, thank goodness." Who would say something like that? Maria just shook her head, looking troubled. The rumor was baseless, a complete fabrication, and it was deliberately designed to damage my reputation and credibility within the community, especially regarding any future medical decisions. It was an ugly, preemptive strike. Who planted that rumor? The answer, I knew with a dreadful certainty, could only be Brianna, preparing the ground for her takeover. The rumor about me verbally abusing hospital staff was a critical piece of Brianna's puzzle, a way to discredit me and justify her taking control of my medical directives. I was determined to find hard proof of her intentions. I called the main hospital where I had received care for decades and requested a meeting with a compliance officer, citing a concern about unauthorized access to my records. The officer, a stern woman named Mrs. Peterson, was immediately concerned. We met the following day, and I explained my fears about Brianna's attempts to seize control of the family estate and my discovery of the opened medical papers in my safe. I told her about the rumors and the sticky note. Mrs. Peterson listened intently, then promised to investigate immediately. An hour later, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Peterson. Her voice was grave. "Mrs. Eleanor, I can't discuss the specifics, but what you feared is correct. Your daughter-in-law, a Mrs. Brianna Harrison, attempted to access your medical file 2 weeks ago. She posed as your primary caregiver and claimed she needed to verify a history of aggressive behavior for your new future living arrangements." My hands were shaking. "Did she succeed?" I managed to ask. "No, ma'am," the nurse whispered into the phone, clearly breaking protocol to tell me this crucial information. "She was stopped by the security measures we have in place. But we have documentation of the attempt, Mrs. Eleanor. This is very serious." Mrs. Peterson, the hospital compliance officer, was true to her word. I received an official, though heavily redacted, printout the next day showing the digital paper trail of the attempted security breach. The document detailed the exact time and date of the unauthorized access attempt. Under the section labeled Attempting User Credentials, it clearly stated, Brianna Harrison, daughter-in-law. It recorded the fabricated reason she had provided, verifying a history of aggression. The sheer brazenness of her attempt to weaponize my medical history was shocking. It was a clear, documented, and professional confirmation of everything I had suspected. The hospital had internal safeguards that thankfully stopped her, but the attempt itself was a powerful piece of evidence. I immediately emailed the printout to Mrs. Peterson, the compliance officer, who responded within minutes with an official email. The subject line alone was terrifying: unauthorized access, breach of HIPAA/potential fraud. The body of the email read, Mrs. Eleanor, this documentation confirms a serious breach attempt. Our legal team will be reviewing this for compliance violation and potential criminal intent. We will move forward with an internal investigation. Please keep this communication strictly confidential. This is serious. I printed the email and held the paper, the official-looking text a tangible piece of my defense. With the evidence laid out before me, the forged contract, the bank slips, the social media screenshots, Michael's confession, and now the hospital's unauthorized access log, the motive crystallized with chilling clarity. Brianna wasn't just a rude daughter-in-law, she was a criminal who wanted total control. She needed to discredit me and the family, isolate me from my son, and then exile me far away so she could have free reign over the family estate. The attempted medical record access was the key. She planned to use a manufactured history of aggression, or mental instability, to force me into the distant, assisted living facility mentioned in her future living arrangement proposal, allowing her to declare medical power of attorney and take full control of the financial assets, including selling my home and the cottage. She was trying to strip me of my autonomy, my respect, and my life savings, all under the guise of handling the family. My hands, which had trembled with hurt a week ago, were now steady with purpose. I spent the next 24 hours meticulously organizing every single piece of evidence. The forged documents, the bank statements, the screenshots, the hospital log, and the lawyer's card were all placed into a single, heavy, dark green binder. The time for being the emotional victim was over. It was time to fight back. I knew I couldn't confront Brianna privately. She would simply lie and cry her way out of it, just as she had done so many times before. The reckoning had to be public, factual, and undeniable. I decided to host a dinner, calling it a restorative family night. I invited everyone: my sister-in-law, my nephews, my cousins, David, and of course Brianna. I sounded completely normal on the phone, apologetic, even, explaining that I felt bad about the recent tension and wanted to clear the air. Brianna was the first to accept, her voice bubbling with false enthusiasm. She clearly thought she had won, that I was finally caving to her demands and was hosting this event as my public surrender. I could almost hear her smirk through the phone. She probably imagined a dinner of apologies, where I would quietly announce my intention to move away. As soon as I hung up, I put the phone on silent and sent 2 more highly confidential, private invitations via secure email. One went to Mrs. Peterson, the hospital compliance officer, and the other to Mr. Henderson, a respected notary public and estate lawyer whom I had secretly consulted a week earlier. The subject line for both was simply, a truthful family gathering, confidential and time-sensitive. The day of the dinner, I moved through my house with a focused, almost surgical calm. I set the table, but the seating arrangement was anything but random. I seated David directly across from me, where he would have a clear, unavoidable view of the projector screen I had secretly installed behind the antique sideboard. Most importantly, I intentionally placed Brianna between my niece, Chloe, the one who had the group chat screenshots, and my sister-in-law, who was one of the key people agreeing with her online insults. I wanted Brianna to be surrounded, completely unable to control the flow of information or the conversation around her. As the last guests began to arrive, I went into the dining room to make a final check. I walked over to my own place setting, near the head of the table. I lifted the white linen napkin, and there, concealed underneath the heavy silver fork, was the small, black, rectangular shape of the projector remote control. It was tucked perfectly, discreetly, and ready for deployment. The table was beautiful, the food smelled divine, and the trap was perfectly set. Brianna arrived late, sweeping into the house with an air of grand importance, dressed in a shimmering blue dress that drew all the attention. She pulled me aside in the kitchen, her smile tight and insincere. "It's lovely that you're doing this, Eleanor," she said, her voice a low, condescending whisper meant only for me. "Just try not to embarrass us again, all right? I told everyone you were just having a sensitive moment." I met her gaze calmly, a soft, completely genuine smile on my face. "Don't worry, Brianna," I replied, my voice light. "I have no intention of embarrassing anyone tonight." She patted my arm and walked into the dining room, looking entirely pleased with herself. Everything was going according to her plan. The dinner started easily enough. Small talk, compliments on the food, nervous laughter. But the tension was a wire stretched tight beneath the surface. As we began the main course, I walked over to the sideboard and picked up the heavy, dark green evidence binder. It was labeled Facts in thick, black marker. I placed it squarely in the middle of the table, directly next to the centerpiece, where everyone could see it. I didn't say anything, but the appearance of the binder was a silent declaration that the air clearing would not be polite or easy. I waited until dessert had been cleared and the coffee was poured. Everyone was relaxed, satiated and off guard. I took a slow sip of my coffee, set the cup down, and pushed back my chair, rising to my feet. A murmur of anticipation went around the table. David smiled at me, thinking I was about to make a sentimental toast. I lifted my glass, and the crystal rang a clear, commanding note. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I began, my voice clear and steady. "As you know, there's been a lot of tension in the family recently. Some things have been said, and some things have been done, that have caused a great deal of misunderstanding." I paused, letting my eyes sweep the room, settling on Brianna, who was nodding sagely, waiting for my apology. "Tonight, I want to clear every misunderstanding." I reached under my napkin, my fingers closing around the projector remote. I pointed it discreetly at the wall behind the sideboard and pressed the power button. The projector whirred to life, and a bright, focused light illuminated the antique wall. Smiles vanished instantly. The very first image that flashed onto the wall, huge and undeniable, was the official hospital compliance log. It clearly showed the time, the date, and the name Brianna Harrison, daughter-in-law, attempting to access my private medical records. The glow of the projector screen illuminated the horrified faces of my family. Gasps rippled around the table, a wave of shock breaking the easy atmosphere. The compliance log was a devastating piece of evidence, professional and completely irrefutable. I watched Brianna's face, the blood drained from it completely, leaving a mask of ashen terror. "That's fake," she stammered, her voice high and strained. She pushed back her chair so violently that it scraped loudly across the floor. "Eleanor, you can't do this. That is a fabricated lie." I didn't need to speak. I simply pointed toward the door. The dining room door opened, and Mrs. Peterson, the hospital compliance officer, walked in, impeccably dressed and carrying a professional-looking portfolio. She looked directly at the stunned family members. Brianna tried to bolt, but Mrs. Peterson's presence, her air of professional authority, froze her in place. The whole room waited, breathing held tight in their chests. Mrs. Peterson walked to the head of the table, pulling out a chair I had set aside for her. She was a picture of calm, and her professionalism only added to the terrifying weight of the moment. She didn't look at Brianna, she addressed the room as a whole. "Good evening. I am here representing the Charleston Regional Hospital Compliance Office. I can confirm that the document currently displayed is a legitimate internal record. Mrs. Brianna Harrison attempted to access Ms. Eleanor's private, protected medical record without authorization. This is an illegal act under HIPAA regulations." The statement, calm and professional, was a final blow. David covered his mouth with his hand, shaking his head slowly in disbelief. Brianna was silent now, her earlier fury replaced by a deer-in-the-headlights look. I used the remote to switch the slide. The next image was a scan of Brianna's future living arrangement proposal, suggesting I be moved out of state. The document was an attempt to justify the medical access. Mrs. Peterson then spoke again. "This, combined with the illegal access attempt, shows clear intent to gain control over Ms. Eleanor's physical and medical autonomy." I clicked the remote again. The screen now displayed the loan agreement for the family summer cottage, the one that had siphoned thousands of dollars in equity. Beside the contract, I had placed a magnified, side-by-side comparison of David's legitimate signature from his passport and the signature on the loan document. The forgery was subtle, but undeniable, and my son was the victim of his wife's deceit. "David," I said, looking straight at my son, whose eyes were wide with a mix of terror and shame, "you told me you signed this because Brianna said it was insurance paperwork." "Look closely." David staggered to his feet and stumbled toward the screen, staring at the magnified image of his own handwriting, twisted and replicated by his wife. His voice was a choked, heartbroken whisper. "You lied to me," he accused Brianna, his whole body shaking. "You told me you were protecting us. You forged my name to steal from my mother." Brianna opened her mouth to argue, but the shame of being exposed by her own husband silenced her completely. The lie had been built so high, and now it was falling all around her. The dam of family shock had completely broken. I clicked the remote one more time, and the screen filled with the screenshots of a secret group chat, the ones Chloe had forwarded to me. Brianna's cruel words flashed across the wall. Dead weight. The relic, clingy, and the final instruction, make sure she's not invited next Sunday. We need the space clear for the discussion. The family members who had participated in the chat, including my sister-in-law, shrank in their seats, their faces red with guilt and embarrassment. The room turned against Brianna instantly, the focus shifting from me to her, the true source of all the malice. A few people looked at her with pure disgust. Suddenly, my niece, Chloe, who had provided the crucial screenshots, stood up from her seat, her phone held high in her hand. Her voice was firm and completely unforgiving. I recorded the dinner last week when she called you not real family, and Eleanor, she announced to the room. And I saw the chats. She has been poisoning the family for months. The group chat screenshots and Chloe's brave testimony had stripped Brianna of her final mask, the one that tried to paint her as the supportive, caring daughter-in-law. There was open hostility now, not just from me, but from everyone who had been manipulated by her pretense. But I knew she still had one final weapon, the ability to cry and manipulate her way out of consequences. I clicked the remote one last time. The screen switched to a static image of the heavy, green binder. I picked it up and held it high for all to see. This binder contains the full evidence of Brianna's plan, I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. It includes the forged loan, the medical access attempt, the malicious rumors, and the attempt to exile me from my home. Then, I opened the binder and pulled out the photocopied draft of her estate plan. She did all of this to gain control of my estate, my property, and my money, I stated. I walked over to David and handed him the plan. He took it, his hands shaking, and scrolled through the pages that detailed how his wife planned to control every dollar and every asset. In a moment of absolute, blinding rage and heartbreak, David ripped the entire folder, the one containing his forged signature and my exile plan, right out of Brianna's hands and tore it to shreds. The sound of the paper ripping was loud and final. Brianna tried her last act of manipulation. She crumpled into her chair, covering her face with her hands, and began to sob dramatically, the loud, heaving kind of sobs that had worked on my soft-hearted son for years. I only did it for us, she wailed. You all hate me. I was only trying to protect our future. Eleanor is always so dramatic. But this time, the tears held no power. The compliance officer was standing there, the forged signature was on the screen, and the screenshots were undeniable. No one rushed to comfort her. David stood over her, his chest heaving, his face a storm of betrayal. Her own friends, whom she had invited, started looking down at the table, realizing they were witnesses to a massive public fraud. One by one, they started silently pushing back their chairs, grabbing their purses and leaving the room. The sight of her own allies abandoning her was the final blow to her performance. She looked up, her eyes wide with desperation, realizing that the usual, easy manipulation had failed completely. The exodus of her friends was the signal that the social hammer had fallen. The family was in stunned silence, all eyes on the sobbing woman who had systematically tried to destroy me. Brianna looked around the table, her tears still flowing, but her eyes were darting, searching for an escape route, a single soul who would take her side. She found none. The compliance officer was taking notes on her pad, and the notary, Mr. Henderson, who had been sitting quietly at the far end of the table, cleared his throat loudly. His action was a cue, a sign that the legal proceedings were about to begin, cementing the social destruction with formal consequences. I walked over to the sideboard and picked up a single, crisp, freshly printed legal document. I placed it in front of the notary. Mr. Henderson checked the document, adjusted his glasses, and looked at me, a silent confirmation of our plan. I placed my hand on the document, a new and updated power of attorney, and looked directly at the stunned, defeated woman across the table. Brianna, I said, my voice calm but firm, you told everyone I was not real family and that I should stop acting like I belong here. You used that belief to try and steal my life, my assets, my autonomy, and my reputation. I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle on her. I believe you were completely right. You are not real family to me, and I will not allow you to belong to my legal or medical life any longer. I picked up a pen and, with a perfectly steady hand, signed the document. It officially revoked David's outdated, joint power of attorney, and more importantly, stipulated that Brianna would be permanently excluded from any future decision-making roles regarding my finances, health, or estate. The notary signed next, officially witnessing the execution of the document, making it legally binding in that very moment. Brianna stared at the paper, her body going slack as the realization hit her. She hadn't just lost an argument, She had lost everything she had schemed for. The fallout from the dinner was instant and catastrophic. The moment the family members left the house, the group chats that Brianna had used to spread her venom exploded, but this time, the venom was directed squarely at her. Chloe and another cousin, now fiercely loyal to me, had taken photos of the hospital log and the forged signatures, and they were posting them to every corner of the extended family's digital life. Brianna was not only removed from the administration roles of her various social groups and volunteer committees, but was completely blocked by most of the family. The social exile was swift and brutal. Later that evening, my own phone rang, and when I answered, I heard the shrieking, hysterical voice of Brianna's mother shouting through the phone. She was accusing me of trying to destroy her daughter's life. I calmly held the phone away from my ear, letting her rant. When she finally paused, I simply said, "Your daughter committed fraud and attempted to steal my medical autonomy. The police and the hospital are involved. Good night." And then I hung up, feeling no guilt at all. The day after the dinner, David arrived at my house, utterly broken. He hadn't slept, and he looked smaller, defeated. He stood in my living room, tears streaming down his face, and apologized. He didn't just apologize for the dinner, he apologized for his weakness, his blindness, and his failure to protect me over the years. "I didn't see who she really was, Mom," he repeated, his voice choked. "She told me she was making things easier. I just trusted her. I failed you." I let him talk, letting him process his own betrayal. When he was done, he confessed that he had moved out of the house temporarily. He needed space to think, to confront the complete destruction of his marriage and his trust. I didn't rush to forgive him. I knew my son was a victim of his own passivity and his wife's vicious control, but he had still stood silently while I was humiliated. "Healing takes time, David," I told him gently, "for both of us. But you are my son. When you are ready to genuinely rebuild, you know where to find me." Brianna, never one to let a story go unspun, tried one last desperate move for public sympathy. She posted a long, tearful public apology on social media, painting herself as a victim of family pressure and claiming that the allegations were an emotional overreaction fueled by my long-term resentment. She included a picture of herself looking frail and heartbroken. It was a perfect piece of manipulative performance, designed to win back the less-informed friends and acquaintances. However, her timing was terrible. Minutes after her post went live, Chloe and my cousin posted their own response. A cascade of screenshots showing her planning the malicious rumors and her gloating over the forged documents. The factual evidence of the hospital log and the forged signatures ruined her narrative instantly. Within the hour, she was removed from her most prized volunteer position at the Art League, and the public conversation had decisively shifted from sympathy to disgust. With the external threat neutralized and the legal boundaries clearly defined, I started the final process of rebuilding my personal autonomy. I called a locksmith and had all the locks on my home completely changed, a small but important act that physically solidified the boundary between my life and Brianna's. I then spent 2 full days with Mr. Henderson, the notary, reviewing and updating every single legal document I owned. I wrote a new will, created an ironclad living trust, and put a provision into the cottage deed that legally prevented any unapproved refinancing without the signature of a court-appointed administrator. I was no longer vulnerable to her schemes. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in months. The next morning, as I went to collect the newspaper, I found a heavy, folded piece of paper slipped under my front door. It was a letter. The letter was handwritten on thick, expensive stationery, and the ink was slightly smudged in places. It was from Brianna. I opened it cautiously, reading her neat, looping script. It was a long, rambling, but surprisingly raw apology. There were no excuses this time, no claims of being misunderstood. She admitted to her hunger for control, her manipulation of David, and her malicious intent to exile me for the sake of the estate. She wrote that she was terrified of what she had become and was deeply ashamed. I read the letter twice, feeling a strange mix of pity and cold resolve. It was too late. I kept the letter, not as a source of vindication, but as a reminder of the kind of toxicity I had finally excised from my life. The past was over. I immediately picked up my phone and called my son, who was staying with Michael. But I didn't call him to talk about the letter. "David," I said, my voice warm, "I want to have Lily over for dinner this weekend. Just the 2 of us. I want to bake her favorite cookies." The dinner with my granddaughter, Lily, was simple and full of quiet joy. We baked, we laughed, and we colored for hours. She was the innocent victim in all this, and protecting her relationship with me was my highest priority. A week later, David returned to my house. He wasn't just humbled, He was a man who had been shattered and was now meticulously, honestly rebuilding. He confessed he had filed for divorce and had moved into his own small apartment. He sat across from me in my study, the same room where I had organized the evidence that had brought down his marriage, and his voice was full of genuine remorse. He looked directly at me, meeting my eyes with a firmness I hadn't seen since he was a young man. "Mom, I was wrong," he said. "You are real family. The realest. I let a monster convince me that you were disposable. I will never let that happen again." We held hands, a moment of profound, painful connection. That night, we decided on a new family tradition, a weekly Sunday dinner, just the two of us and Lily, with no other people invited. Our new weekly dinner tradition began a quiet healing in the family. The food was simple, the conversation easy, and the tension that had been a permanent, choking fixture of my life was finally gone. There was no more manipulation, no whispering, and no vying for control. My role as the respected elder was restored, not by force, but by the undeniable truth that had emerged. I began hosting holidays again, and the family who came were the ones who had shown me loyalty or remorse. They were the real family now. They asked for my advice on the cottage, they asked about my health with genuine concern, and the atmosphere was one of quiet, genuine warmth. One beautiful Sunday afternoon, while David and Lily were in the garden, I asked Chloe to take a photo of us all together. The light was perfect, the smiles were real, and the family felt whole again. A true family photo, captured with love and honesty. I looked at the photo, smiling softly, and put it into a small antique silver frame. The whole painful, terrible journey had been worth it for this moment of true peace. Brianna had tried to erase me, to define me as an outsider for her own greedy ends. But her malice had become the instrument of my liberation. She taught me a harsh, unforgettable lesson about the nature of family, trust, and boundaries. She told me I wasn't real family. She used those words to try and push me out, to erase my history, and to steal my future. She thought family was a title you could seize and an asset you could control. But she was wrong. The family who stands silently by while you are humiliated is not your family. The family who conspires to steal your autonomy is certainly not your family. But family isn't who pushes you out. It's who stands with you when the truth finally comes to light. It's the ones who are still sitting at your table, humble and true, after the dust is settled. It's the ones you choose to rebuild with, piece by painful piece. I placed a framed photograph on my bedside table, a testament to the new, genuine life I had built. I hope you enjoyed this true revenge story. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your favorite part of Eleanor's final act of justice in the comments below.